The Calamity Club by Kathryn Stockett is by far the longest book I've read in 2026. But is it actually also the best audiobook listen of 2026 so far? Hi, I'm Amanda, and this is Spineless Books, spoiler-free reviews for readers and listeners like me. If you haven't already subscribed, please do. It really helps the channel. And in exchange, every week you'll get a spoiler-free review from all varieties of genres, except maybe romance. The audiobook for Calamity Club is 28 hours and 44 minutes long. Even if you speed it up, you're still looking at 20 to 25 hours of listening. That's a huge time investment. So why is this book actually completely worth it? I think the thing that makes this book really work is its incredible pacing, but I'll get into that in a minute. First, I want to give you a little overview of what you can expect from the plot. Spoiler-free, of course. The book is set in 1933 in Oxford, Mississippi, post-Depression. Everything is a terrible idea right now. Everyone is struggling, whether you're rich or you're poor. The whole country, or at least all of Mississippi, is really in dire straits. So we follow 3 women, and each of those women has a very different circumstance, and they have a very different attitude towards things. But ultimately, they end up coming together at a certain point, and how is up to you to read to find out. But I'll tell you a little bit more about each one of them. First, you have Birdie, a young woman who by now should be married, but isn't. She hasn't found her way, and she's a little bit oddly independent for this time. She's living with her parents, but she travels to Mississippi in order to meet her sister Frances, who is a total social climber, because Birdie and her family need some financial help. So why not go see your super wealthy sister? Birdie is very outspoken, and she feels very much like a pioneering and forward-thinking woman for the time. Next, you have Charlie, who's down on her luck, and she's fighting against literally everything. She's got all kinds of circumstances that are working against her, and she's just full of grit and determined not to give up on anything. So Charlie is sort of your underdog in this story because she's got nothing going for her, but she's determined to change her status in the world. Lastly, you have my favorite, Meg. Meg is an 11-year-old orphan who is smart and sassy, and sometimes prone to a little bit of backtalk. But you know what? She's pretty much a truth sayer. She really calls it like she sees it, and she's in some terrible circumstances, but boy, is she a joy to hear. Meg has big, big dreams, and she's not exactly sure how she's going to attain them, but she is not willing to give up on them. The story swings between all 3 of these characters, and one of the things that was so well done in this book was, while I was never bored with any one of the characters' stories, at the moment that I started to think, hey, I wonder what's going on with so-and-so, Kathryn Stockett would change our focus. And it almost felt like she could read my mind as a listener because she knew exactly when I was beginning to wonder about the others. And it wasn't, again, out of boredom. I was always happy to listen to whomever was the topic, but I really just enjoyed the way that she seemed to know when she should transition from one character to another. The pacing felt perfect, and that's part of what made such a long book flow so easily and never feel long. The characters are incredibly well developed and have really different circumstances. They do at moments in the book intertwine, but I never found myself more interested in one than another, or at least not disinterested in anyone. I do have a favorite in Meg, but I'll tell you a little bit more about why later. But I was happy to hear about everybody. Everybody was interesting. Every part of the book was interesting. But the characters were so different and had such different voicings and decision-making styles and challenges that it always kept me in it. Stockett set the scene with an almost cinematic setting. The history that she packed into this was filled to the brim. There were so many issues of the time that she covered, but she also gave me a really important sense of what it was like and what sort of the landscape was like in a way that made me feel like I was really picturing the story as I listened to it. She includes and addresses racial prejudice, other prejudice, the way we make assumptions about each other, and the impact that can have, positive or negative. And while this book does focus on 3 women, it's not limited to women's issues. She covers all sorts of things that were happening in the early 30s in Mississippi. While my interest remained intact no matter who I was listening about, Meg was definitely the glue of the novel for me. Every time it cut to Meg, she was just so smart and sassy, and for someone who was in some fairly horrible circumstances, I just love hearing her perspective. It was almost like she had a sense of herself from within, but also externally, in a way that was really precocious, but also really believable for an 11-year-old. She's so sassy and funny and really injected the book with warmth and humor and a lot of momentum, because for young Meg, getting out of her circumstances is urgent. So she drove the pace of the book as well. Again, it didn't drop with our other characters, but for some reason Meg just picked up the momentum every time I got to hear about her. As you begin to understand why it is that we're following these three specific characters, you also have to juggle listening about tons of other characters. But Stockett keeps it all organized and clean, and I never got confused as to who anyone was. I spent ample time learning each sort of set of circumstances, so I wasn't wondering who minor characters were at any point in this story. Everyone was well developed, even if they only appeared for a very short time. Every archetype was convincing, and not a single character felt flat, especially due to the strong dialogue. Now, I know many of you choose to read books with your eyes, but as someone who listens, I have to talk about the narration of this book and how incredibly special it was. Every character, with the exception of Meg, is voiced by January LaVoy. Now, January LaVoy happens to be one of my favorite narrators. I think she has such a great, wonderful, sort of natural speaking voice, but she also does an excellent job of characterization without overpowering the story. You can distinguish who is who amongst all the characters she's speaking as, but it's never over the top and it's never cartoony. I mean, there was one character that I found a little bit cartoony, but she needed to be cartoony in the story, so it made complete sense. But I love January LaVoy, so to hear her narrate pretty much everyone in this book was really exciting. Now, when one of your favorite narrators is on board, and that narrator's ability is completely trumped by a different narrator, now you know you have an audiobook on your hands that's incredibly special. Jenna Lamia narrated Meg, and if this woman does not walk away from this story with some sort of award for her narration, I don't even know what the audiobook industry is anymore. The way that she voiced Meg was so spectacular, believable as an 11-year-old, sassy, full of life, but also full of emotion. You really got the sense that Meg was a character who was putting herself out in the world sometimes vulnerably, other times with confidence, sometimes she was just full of attitude, and other times she was completely scared. So Meg really carries a huge variety of emotions, and Jenna Lamia nailed every one of them. Every time Meg's character came on in the book, I just sat up straighter and listened. I love the way Lamia narrated her. She was so childlike and so engrossing and just honestly believable as a little kid, but also a little kid who's really smart and knows what she's talking about. So I really hope Jenna Lamia walks away with this, and while I love January LaVoy, I couldn't even believe that I was thinking to myself that she was the second best narrator in this story. So kudos to both of these women for bringing this book to life. I do think that's part of what made the audio go just so fast, because you had two 5-star narrators really carrying you through it. Meg deals with some things that no 11-year-old should have to go through, and Jenna Lamia brings the narration down when she needs to. So it's not just bubbles and fun for Jenna Lamia. She's really paying attention to the ups and downs of Meg's life. And I think the way that she captured them in audio is outstanding. So even if you are a paper reader or an e-reader, you might want to consider listening to this one because it's really spectacular. Overall, this story follows a few characters to create a portrait of a time. And it tells you a lot about expectations and how you can comply or how you can subvert them. But most importantly, it talks about the difficulty of finding yourself. And that's something that has always been and probably always will be. It's very relatable to today. The idea that I spent 29 hours listening to this story and never lost momentum, never had a lull, never got bored, is really a credit to Kathryn Stockett's writing. If you like The Briar Club by Kate Quinn, I think this is one you should definitely pick up. It has a lot of similarities to that story, but this one is just much bigger and much more involved, and it hits on found family in a similar way, but I think this is a way more sophisticated book. It's not a difficult read, but you do need to know what you're getting into as far as commitment for length. This is a long one. But I have to say, if you like long books, it's gonna feel short. And if you're intimidated by long books, this one might be worth trying. It really flows incredibly well, and it didn't feel long at all. At one point, I looked at the counter on the book, and I realized I had already listened to basically 2 average-length books, and I wasn't upset about it. It really is a flowing, smooth read that I think you'll be surprised that you get through it with such ease. I rated this book 4.5 stars, teetering on 5. It's really interesting because my main reason for wanting it to be 4.5 instead of 5 was the length. But then again, I can't think of a single part of this book that I would remove if it were up to me. So maybe that's an unfair criticism. Everything fit, everything had its place. But somewhere between 4.5 and 5 for me. It wasn't quite a perfect book, but I did really enjoy it and love every minute of it, especially given how very long it was. If you typically read a paper book or on an e-reader, I really urge you to try the audio on this one. January Lavoie is just an amazing narrator, but Jenna Lamia is not to be missed. Her voicing of Meg really made this a standout audiobook for me, and I think as far as narration is concerned, this might be a top book of 2026. I love the book overall, but the narration took it to a whole nother level. Let me know in the comments if you've read it already, or if you're planning on reading it, or if you're hesitating to read it, or any of the above. Any thoughts you have about this book are welcome, even if they differ pretty much entirely from mine. This is definitely one of the stronger audiobooks I have heard in quite some time. But remember, you might love what I hate or hate what I love. So make your own opinion. But thanks for listening to mine. See you next time.